G'day. I'm gonna be reading Blinky Chapter 2. Sit down, grab your cordial, grab your cup of tea, grab your biscuits, fucking go lawnmower over your dog, and let's get into this book. Chapter 2 today. Chapter 2 Blinky Bill. Alright. No, it was a new role. That was chapter 1. I'm thinking a tragedy. Chapter 2, a tragedy. The koala family lived so happily, never thinking of harm or that anything could happen to disturb their little home, as they all asked for plenty, as all they asked were plenty of fresh gum leaves and the warm sun. They had no idea such things as guns were in the world, or that a human being had a heart so cruel that he would take a pleasure in seeing a poor little body riddled with bullets hanging helplessly from the treetop. And they had no idea this same being would walk away after shooting a bear, content to see him dead, no matter if he fell to the ground or not. That same being might just as well taken his gun and shoot baby kookaburras. So helpless were they all, and so trusting. Poor Mr. Koala one day was curled up asleep in his favorite corner when a terrible thing happened. Bang! He opened his eyes in wonder. What was that? Did the limb of the tree snap? Were the young cubs it was scarlecking? He moved very slowly to take a look, and bang! Again. At the same time he felt a stinging pain in his leg. What could it be? And peering over the bough of the tree, he saw a man on the ground with something long black in his arms. He gazed down in wonderment. Whatever that was, and how his little leg hurt. Another bang, and his ears began to hurt. Suddenly a great fear seized him. He slowly turned and tried to hide round the tree, peering at the ground. As he did so, bang! Again, and now his poor little body was stringing all over. He grunted loudly and slowly climbed up the tree, calling Mrs. Koala and Blinky. As he went, he managed to reach the topmost. There's Mr. Koala, scared. Tears were pouring down his little face. Branch and now turned to see where his family were. Tears were pouring down his poor little face. He brushed them away with his front paws and cried just like a baby. Fortunately, Mrs. Koala and Blinky Bill were hidden in the leaves, quite motionless, and the shadows of the tree made them appear as part of it. The man with the gun stood and waited a long time, then walked away, whistling as he went. The only sound to be heard in the bush, except the cries of a little bear far up in the tree, all that day and night, the little family, they huddled together, not daring to move or think of the sweet supper. As the sun rose, the birds woke with a great chattering. The earth stirred with the feet of small animals, running backwards and forwards. But up in the gum tree, and Mother Bear and her baby sat staring in surprise at another bear who did not move. They grunted and cried, and even felt him with their soft paws, but he still did not move. All that day and the next night they sat patiently waiting for him to wake, when at last Mr. Bear seemed to understand that. And, that's Mrs. Koala. I don't know what Blinky is, but they're hungry, Mr. Koala. They sat patiently waiting for him to wake. Oh, I read that wrong. Whatever. Her husband was dead. She climbed down a tree with Blinky following close behind, and went to another tree where they had a good meal of young leaves and tender shoots. "Why are we eating so much?" Blinky inquired. "We are going away, dear," Mrs. Bear replied. "We must find a tree farther in the bush where those men with guns can't come. And as we may be a long time in finding a suitable home, these leaves will keep us from feeling hungry." Together the mother and her cub slowly climbed down the tree, and great was their surprise to find Angela Wallaby waiting for them. "Where yous going, Mrs. Bear?" she asked. "Far into the bush with Blinky, away from the man with his gun," Mrs. Bear replied. "What will I do?" Angela asked. "I shall miss Blinky terribly," and her big eyes filled with tears. "Come with us," grunted Blinky. "Oh, that will be splendid," said Angela. "I know a gum tree far away with a baby in it, just like Blinky. Blinky can crawl up on my back when his legs are tired, and I'll carry him along. You too, Mrs. Bear, if you feel the journey is too long." Thanking her to... Sorry, cut. They just woke up. It's 6 o'clock at night. I'm not joking either. Fucking ears go, mate. I'm reading this 6 o'clock at night. Just woke up. Oh, splendid gum tree baby, blah blah blah. Thanking her, the three started away. Mrs. Bear turned and gave one sorrowful look at the tree that had been their home for so long. It had been a kind of tree. She littered them through all weathers and feeding them every day of the year, but not strong enough to protect them from tragedy. After traveling for a mile or more, the bears began to feel very tired, as they were not used to walking along the ground. Very rarely leave the branches of the tree. Occasionally one will climb down to feed on some vegetation in the grass, but they feel very strange having to use their 4 legs to walk with. It is so different to sitting on a limb of a tree, hind paws firmly grasping the branch, while the 2 front paws are busily pulling down tender leaves to their mouths. So it was no wonder why Mrs. Koala and Blinky began to limp. "Let us rest here under the bush," said Angela, hopping up to a thick scrubby tree. "We can have a sleep, and when the moon is up, we will go on." "I think you are wonderful," said Mrs. Koala, and all 3 lay at the foot of the bush. The 2 little koalas, glad to rest their sore little toes, and tired little legs. And the cool. So they slept until the sun went down, and waking up and feeling very hungry, Mrs. Koala and Blinky climbed a sapling. Blinky reached ahead, and they neared the top, and scuffled his mouth as full. Don't gobble, said Mrs. Bear, cuffing his ears. They're so juicy, said young Blinky, as he peered over the branch and threw a few leaves down to Angela. They are nice, said Angela, as she munched them ever so gently. I have never tasted these leaves before, but we must not stop here any longer. This is a strange country, and we have a long way to go. I don't want to go, wailed Blinky. I'm tired. Both of you hop on my back, and we'll be there in no time. I can leap. That's Blinky and his mum on top of Mrs. Wallaby. Mrs. Wallaby, I'll have sex with Mr. Wallaby. Alright. It was great fun. Along in the moonlight, like a kangaroo. After some arguing over the matter, Mrs. Bear and Blinky climbed on her back, and away they went. It was great fun. Flop, 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 through the grass, ducking their heads to miss the branches and twigs of long-growing trees, and then reaching along through the open country. Many a rabbit looked up in surprise from his upper table to see the strange sight, and possums screeched in the branches as they looked down at some new kind of wallaby, as they thought at least breathless, and tried. Angelina stopped at the foot of the tall, straight gum tree. Silver white it stood in the moonlight, with branches spread far up in the sky. Here is your new home, said Angela. How beautiful, murmured Mrs. Bear, as she and Blinky crawled down from their friend's back. It is safe, and you will be very happy here, and Blinky will have a playmate. Angelina flopped on the grass, her long legs spread out, and she panted loudly. Where are you going to live? Mrs. Bear inquired. Won't you near us, please? I'm going to live just around the corner, said Angela. I have a friend who is waiting for me. Is she a relation? Asked Mrs. Bear. No, replied Angela. She is a he. And blushing, she's got a boyfriend. She looked very slowly down at her paws, and suddenly turned and opened away. Dear, grunted Mrs. Bear. The world is full of surprises. Now you young scrump, come here and climb this tree with me. And Blinky scumbled onto his mother's back. I think it's quite time you used your own legs, said Mrs. Bear. But she made no attempt to shake him off. Slowly she crawled up. A new tree was no joke, and this was ever so high and straight, with many grunts. She eventually reached a fork in the branches and stopped to take in her surroundings. Everything seemed very quiet, but her eyes glistened as she looked at the young gum tips. A young cub to feed was a matter of no light concern, and she was so particular. Only the youngest leaves he ate. Blinky was the first to discover other tenants in the tree. Look, mother, he whispered. There's a little bear, just like me. Sure enough, peeping at them from between leaves above, tree, looking marvelous with fucking leaves above their heads. Two funny eyes and a small black nose could be seen. Now no quarrelling, said Mrs. Bear steamily. I've had enough for one day, and I want peace. Another climb, and they came to a branch where sat Master Bear. Helloa, called Blinky. Helloa, replied the other bear. Where's your mother? Mrs. Bear asked. Tell her I would like to speak with her. He crawled up the tree slowly. The many grunts were heard to come from the direction until Mother Bear looked down, called in high-pitched grunts. Come up and bring your son to tea. It did not take Mrs. Koala and Blinky long to find a way, and there all night the little bears ate and gossiped. Mrs. Koala told her story, and it was agreed that she and Blinky should have the branch 2 limbs higher up for their new home. Very carefully she told Blinky he must behave as a good little cub should. Don't brush about, lift your feet when you walk, don't slide down the belts, and don't drop your food over the side of the tree, as Mrs. Bear below us might object. I'll be a good cub, said Blinky, very seriously, and straight away started to nibble some young leaves. During the evening, Mrs. Koala, a friend, came up to see how she and Blinky liked their new home. She brought her young son Snubby with her, and a dear little chap he was. About the same age as Blinky, and in fact so like him that it was hard to tell them apart. And that's Snobby. What? Oh, got out too. Now you two young eucalyptus pots. Run. I'm reading Blinky Bill. Let's have a game. And Snobby's mother. I want to talk to Mrs. Koala. I'm reading a fucking book. Have a game. Snobby, I want to talk, Mrs. Koala. Blinky and Snobby needed to no second bidding and were up the branches playing and climbing in the most dangerous corners in no time. You have not told me your name, said Mrs. Koala, her friend. My name is Grunty. Oh, what a nice name. I'm sure you must be proud of it, said Mrs. Koala. Well, no, not exactly, said Mrs. Grunty. I got the name while I was in Queensland. Good gracious, where is that? Asked Mrs. Koala. Have you ever heard of it? It is possible, said Mrs. Grunty, and she looked more surprised than ever. Well, I must tell you my experiences. I was taken from my mother when I was about 6 months old by a man who was trapping bears. I don't know how I escaped from being killed like all my relations, but I heard the man say to his friend as he caught me and put me in a sack, "This little fellow's a pretty one, and I've promised a 10-bob note a baby." The sack was very dark inside, and I felt very frightened, and was slung over a horse's side, and carried for many miles in the manner. I knew when we left the bush track, because the smell of gum trees faded away, and I could smell for many miles after seemed to be horse. Sometimes he snorted, and I could have jumped out of the sack with fright if there had been a hole to jump through. After many hours we stopped. and I was taken out of the sack and handed to a lady and a little girl who were outside a big house by the roadside. Isn't it a darling? Isn't he a darling? Said the little girl as she patted me. None of them seemed to think I might be a little girl. They all called me he. I was squeezed and hugged and patted, and needless to tell you, Mrs. Koala, I scrambled up her arm and on. What do you want? What's happening? Oh no. Fuck me, can't. I scrambled up her arm and onto her shoulder. It was the nearest thing to a gum tree I could see. But alas, no gum leaves grew there. Only funny stuff all around me called hair. The little girl, mother and father said. I looked so surprised. Well, now Mrs. Carlisle wouldn't any bear be surprised to find herself up a gum tree that tall. Mrs. Koala was too amazed to reply. She just grunted. The next thing that happened, continued Mrs. Grunty, was to place me on a thing they called a cushion. It certainly was soft and cozy, but where was my snug tree corner? I wondered, and I also felt very hungry. I forgot to ask the trapper for leaves for the pet, said the lady. Give me some cake, said the man. They offered me some dreadful looking stuff, and of course I could not eat it, and I began to cry for my gum tips. Then the little girl said, perhaps I would like bread and milk, and she ran away to get it. I was so hungry that I ate a little and then fell asleep as the jogging about on the horse had made my body ache. I felt very tired. They placed me in a box with a bear, just like me, only he didn't breathe, and his eyes didn't blink, and he was soft and cuddly like my mother. They stuck Mrs. Grunty and in a box of a toy koala. How many fucking pages on it? No, not long now. Smell of eucalyptus, but he was soft and cuddly like my mother. I woke up in the morning, and what do you think they brought for me for breakfast? Bananas. How shocking, gasped Mrs. Koala. And still no leaves. No leaves, sighed Mrs. Grunty. And as the day went by, they became concerned about me. They offered me cheese, lollies, and even pudding to add to my sorrowful plight. I heard the little girl's father talking about something he read in a paper in which said during the year 1920 to 1921, 205,679 koalas were killed and they skin sold to the fur market under the name of wombats. Hearing this, Mrs. Koala gave a jump with fright and nearly fell off her perch. Oh, how dreadful is only a short time ago that my husband was shot, and we supposed to be protected and allowed to live. What will I do if Blinky is killed? You need not worry, said Mrs. Grunty, patting her paw in comfort. Hey, we are safe here. No man ever comes into this part of the bush. But I must tell you the rest of my story. These people were really trying to kind me. They did not wish to lose me, but it was the worst kind of kindness. As you know, I would die very quickly if I had no gum leaves to feed on. After 2 more days of tempting me with everything they could think of, they became alarmed and decided I must go back on the bush. we would never forgive ourselves if the dear thing died. The mother and father said, but the little girl began to cry. She brought me her best dolly and put it in my arms to try and comfort me, but I felt too sick and hungry to take any notice of it. That night, when she was asleep, her father put me in the sack again, and once more I was on a horseback. But he rode with me this time. I rode all through the night. Just as the day was breaking, I smelled the bush, and oh, the gum trees already. I felt better for I knew I was home again. Very soon the horse stopped, and once more I was taken from the sack. I blinked my eyes, scarcely able to believe that I was in my own world again. The little girl's father put me down on the ground at the foot of a tall gum tree. "There you are, little fellow," he said. "I hope you are happy now, and I'll do the best to see no more of you. I trapped so long and staying just long enough to see me on my way up the tree." He turned on his horse and rode through the bush. "And how did you find your way home?" asked Miss Scholar. "It took me a long time, as I was very weak, and Mrs. Grunty and I had to find our own white gum tree, as you know. But I travelled gradually at night, and went on travelling until I found this very tree, which liked so much that I stayed here. And besides," she gave a little giggle, "Mr. Grunty happened to be in the branches." There's a toy, koala playing toy, I don't know why. And that's the end of chapter 2. Come back another day if you want to hear more.